Hey guys, welcome back to another art video. So as the title mentions, I will be starting a new thing on my channel called subscriber rewards, but I will talk more in detail about that towards the end of the video. So first of all, this video, it's going to be a gouache painting of Nami from League of Legends. I had a really limited palette for my gouache paints because I only had 2 tubes. They came from a calligraphy set I got a couple years ago, so they're kind of old, but they've never been opened before. So the 2 colors that I had were Persian blue and yellow ochre. And then I have the third option of mixing the 2 colors to get a third color. And so I ended up with olive green as the third color. So then I was looking at the colors and I was wondering what character has a very limited color palette that these colors would actually work coloring the entire character. And the first thing that came to mind was Nami from League of Legends, because she has a very greenish, bluish, also yellowish kind of tint to her design. So I just thought about coloring her. She's not my favorite type of character to play with in the game. I think her abilities are kind of boring, but she was the only character that fit the exact color scheme that I needed. So I just went ahead and colored her. And the paper I'm using is 100-pound cold press watercolor paper. At first I wasn't sure which kind of paper to use with gouache because this was my first time using it, but I did know that gouache requires a lot of water to paint with, so, or at least a moderate amount of water, so I just thought that a 100-pound cold press would be the best since it would minimize warping and also take the water pretty well. But after I finished the painting, I actually did some research on the best paper to use with gouache, and I found out that a lot of artists were using hot press, and I think that might have been better because for cold press there's a lot more texture on the paper, and when you water down the gouache you can see the texture, like the texture is really prominent. But when you start layering paint, then the gouache starts becoming more opaque, and you can start seeing the texture of the gouache paint instead of the texture of the paper. So it's just a little bit of contrast there when you're using textured paper with gouache rather than just regular smooth paper. But for me, I didn't really want the texture, so I guess hot press would have worked better. Anyway, getting into my thoughts about using gouache, it's an interesting hybrid between watercolor and acrylic paint. But I do find that it is better than acrylic because I've always hated how fast acrylic paint dries, and it's like nearly impossible to render and like blend on top of colors. So I really dislike using acrylic, and gouache is a really interesting combination between acrylic and watercolor. So when you water the gouache down, it looks a lot like watercolor. It even performs a lot like watercolor. But when you start layering, or if you put a thick layer of paint on the paper, then it starts acting like acrylic. There is something I did notice about gouache, and that's that when you start to layer the colors, you start losing the color that you put underneath. So it doesn't really, it's not really transparent like watercolor is, and it allows you to blend the colors on top of each other, but with still not losing the color underneath. So instead the color on top would be mixing with the color underneath. But for gouache it's a little different. It's more like acrylic in terms of like you can't make the paint translucent once you start layering. So it's a very different technique to paint with gouache, and the media ended up confusing me a whole lot when I was painting with it. But I definitely think it does come with practice because I have seen a lot of artists do some really interesting pieces with gouache. And I also like how you can reactivate dried gouache paint with water. So if the paint happens to dry in your palette, then you can easily reactivate it with a wet brush. And I find that's very helpful, and that's very similar to watercolors as well. So gouache can also be found in pans. So like there's little blocks of paint that have already been dried up, and all you have to do to reactivate it is mix the water with the paint and it would start reactivating. So that was an interesting feature, although it makes your painting less permanent, so if anything damp happens to touch it, then it will reactivate the paint. And I have touched the surface of gouache and it doesn't even feel like acrylic. It feels like a sticky like a really sticky version of watercolor, because I guess the little bit of moisture that's on my finger is reactivating the ink while I touch the painting, and so it just feels a little more sticky. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're ever doing a gouache painting, then you need to properly preserve it under glass or in a plastic wrap or something. All in all, this was a really fun painting for me to try out. I still like watercolor a whole lot more than gouache, just because of the versatility of watercolor. So I won't be getting any more tubes of gouache, but for the 2 tubes that I do have, I'll just be saving that for doing underpaintings later on in my work. Alright, so now I'm going to get into talking about my subscriber rewards program. So I've been getting a lot of new subscribers lately, and I've been thinking of a way to give back. So what I was doing from the past 2 weeks was I was just choosing a random person from my subscriber list and asking them what I can draw for them. But unfortunately, nobody was responding to me, no matter how many times I re-rolled. So I'm guessing that majority of my subscribers aren't really active, and so it was kind of a pain to try and get anybody to reply to me so that I could draw something for them. So instead, I'm going to be drawing whatever I feel like, and I'm going to choose a random commenter that's also subscribed to me to receive the original artwork, as well as drawing a little extra for them. This is going to be an event for active subscribers only. It's also going to be for people in the United States only, because I'm going to be covering the cost of shipping, and since I want to start doing this on a regular basis, just to make sure that I'm not losing too much pocket money, I'm limiting it only to people in the United States. So if you're the chosen winner, then you will be receiving 3 original paintings. The first one is my Sriracha oil pastel painting that you've seen in a previous video. Originally I was going to send it to somebody in Europe, but shipping a 2-ounce letter to Europe is $15, so I just decided not to do that. And so the second thing you'll be receiving is this Nami gouache painting that I'm working on right now. And the third thing, I'm going to do another oil pastel painting of your choice. And it's going to be a portrait bust only, but it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a pet or even an object if you want. And I only accept photographs as references because I feel like photographs have the best color references, and I need really good color references whenever I'm doing a painting or working with color in general. So leave a comment below if you want to be entered into this raffle, and if you happen to just want to comment and you're not in the United States, then just be sure to mention that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.